Marcus Johnson lived a quiet life in a small suburban neighborhood. His house was like any other on the street. Neatly trimmed hedges, a white picket fence, and flower pots lining the front porch. To his neighbors, Marcus seemed like an ordinary man. He worked as a handyman during the day, fixing leaky faucets and painting walls for people who needed help around their homes. In the evenings, he could often be found sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunset or chatting with his wife, Sarah, while their two kids played in the yard. But there was more to Marcus than met the eye. What no one knew, not even his closest friends, was that Marcus wasn't just a handyman. He was a retired Navy SEAL, one of the most decorated soldiers in U.S. history. For over 20 years, he had served his country in some of the most dangerous missions imaginable. From rescuing hostages in foreign lands to dismantling terrorist cells deep in enemy territory, Marcus had done it all. His reputation among his fellow SEALs was legendary. They called him the Ghost because he moved silently, struck swiftly, and left no trace behind. When Marcus decided to retire, he wanted nothing more than to leave that violent chapter of his life behind. He craved peace, normalcy, and a chance to raise his family without constantly looking over his shoulder. So he bought a modest home in this sleepy little town, far away from the chaos of war zones and covert operations. Here, he thought, he could finally live the simple life he'd always dreamed of. At first, everything went smoothly. The neighbors welcomed them warmly, bringing over casseroles and offering friendly smiles. Marcus joined the local community center, where he coached his son's Little League team and helped organize weekend barbecues. Life felt good. It felt safe. But beneath the surface, trouble was brewing. One Friday evening, as Marcus sat on his porch sipping coffee, something caught his attention. Across the street, Mrs. Peterson, an elderly woman who lived alone, pulled her curtains shut quickly when she noticed him looking in her direction. It was such a fleeting moment that most people would have dismissed it. But Marcus wasn't most people. Years of training had taught him to notice details others overlooked. He scanned the street casually, pretending not to pay too much attention. A car drove by slowly, its headlights flickering slightly. Inside, two men sat silently, their eyes fixed on Marcus's house. Another vehicle parked further down the block had been there for hours, though Marcus hadn't seen anyone get out of it. Something didn't feel right. Marcus shook his head, trying to push away the uneasy feeling creeping up his spine. Maybe he was being paranoid. After all, this was supposed to be a peaceful neighborhood. People here cared about each other. They waved hello in the mornings and shared stories at the grocery store. Surely nothing bad could happen here. Still, Marcus couldn't shake the sense that he was being watched. Inside the house, Sarah called out to him. "Dinner's ready," she said cheerfully. The smell of roasted chicken wafted through the open windows, mixing with the cool evening breeze. Marcus forced a smile and stood up, setting his coffee mug aside. As he walked inside, he glanced back at the street one last time. The car that had passed earlier was gone now, but the parked vehicle remained. Its tinted windows made it impossible to see inside. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked as Marcus closed the door behind him. "Yeah," he replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "Just thought I saw something strange outside." Sarah raised an eyebrow but didn't press him. She knew better than to ask too many questions. Over the years, she'd learned to read between the lines when it came to Marcus. Sometimes, he carried burdens she couldn't fully understand. That night, as the family gathered around the dining table, laughter filled the room. Their daughter, Emily, told jokes she'd learned at school, and their son, Jake, proudly showed off the trophy he'd won at his soccer game earlier that week. Marcus tried to focus on the joy surrounding him, but his mind kept drifting back to those cars and the shadowy figures lurking in plain sight. After dinner, Marcus tucked the kids into bed and kissed Sarah goodnight. Then, instead of settling into his recliner to watch TV like he usually did, he grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside for one last check of the property. The air was crisp, and the stars twinkled brightly overhead. Everything appeared calm, too calm. As he walked along the perimeter of the house, Marcus inspected every corner carefully. The backyard was empty except for the swing set and a few scattered toys. The front yard looked untouched, too. But when he reached the side of the house near the driveway, he noticed something odd, a faint scrape mark on the garage door. It was fresh, barely visible unless you were looking closely. Marcus knelt down to examine it. His fingers brushed against the metal surface, tracing the groove left behind. Someone, or something, had tried to force their way in. His jaw tightened. This wasn't paranoia anymore. Someone had been here. For a moment, anger flared inside him. How dare they come onto his property? Who did they think they were messing with? But then, just as quickly as the anger came, it faded, replaced by a cold, calculated calm. Marcus had faced worse threats than this. He'd stared death in the face countless times and walked away unscathed. If someone wanted to play games with him, they were going to regret it. Back inside, Marcus locked all the doors and checked the windows. He retrieved a baseball bat from the closet and placed it beside the bed, just in case. Then, lying awake next to Sarah, he stared at the ceiling, listening intently for any unusual sounds. The hours ticked by slowly. At some point, exhaustion took over and Marcus drifted off to sleep. But even in his dreams, he remained alert, his senses tuned to every creak and groan of the old house. Little did he know, the real nightmare was yet to begin. Somewhere out there, hidden in the shadows, a group of men plotted their next move. They didn't know who Marcus really was. To them, he was just another black man living in a neighborhood they believed should belong to them. They saw him as weak, vulnerable, and easy prey. They couldn't have been more wrong, and soon they would learn that lesson the hard way. It was past midnight when the first sound woke Marcus from his restless sleep. At first, it was faint, a soft thud, like something heavy hitting the ground outside. His eyes snapped open immediately, years of military training kicking in without hesitation. He lay still for a moment, listening intently. The house was quiet except for the rhythmic breathing of his wife beside him and the distant hum of crickets outside. Then came another noise, this time louder. Glass shattered somewhere downstairs, followed by muffled voices. Marcus sat up slowly, careful not to wake Sarah. His heart raced, but his mind remained calm. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was real. Someone, or multiple someones, was inside his home. He reached for the baseball bat he'd placed next to the bed earlier that evening. Gripping it tightly, he swung his legs over the side of the mattress and stood silently. Years of stealth missions had taught him how to move without making a sound. Every step he took toward the door was deliberate, measured, and light as a whisper. Before heading downstairs, Marcus paused at the doorway to check on his children. Emily and Jake were fast asleep, their small forms barely visible under the covers. He hesitated for a second, torn between staying to protect them and confronting the intruders head-on. But he knew what he had to do. If these people were here to harm his family, he needed to stop them before they got any closer. With one last glance at the kids, Marcus slipped out of the room and began descending the stairs. Each creak of the wooden steps felt deafening in the silence, but he moved with precision, avoiding the spots he knew would groan too loudly. As he neared the bottom, the voices became clearer. They were low and harsh, punctuated by occasional laughter. Peering around the corner, Marcus saw them, 3 masked figures dressed in dark clothing, their faces obscured by ski masks. One held a crowbar, while another carried a spray paint can. The living room was already a mess. Furniture lay overturned, picture frames smashed, and walls defaced with hateful graffiti. Racist slurs and symbols covered every surface, dripping wet and glistening under the moonlight streaming through the broken window. Marcus's jaw clenched so hard, it hurt. Anger burned inside him, but he forced himself to stay focused. Emotions wouldn't help him now. Strategy would. The intruders hadn't noticed him yet. They were too busy vandalizing his home, laughing among themselves as if this were nothing more than a game. One of them kicked over a lamp, sending shards of glass scattering across the floor. Another sprayed a swastika onto the wall above the fireplace. That's when Marcus decided to act. Stepping into the room, he cleared his throat loudly. "You're in my house," he said, his voice steady and commanding. All three men froze, startled by his sudden appearance. For a split second, there was complete silence. Then one of them turned, spotting Marcus standing at the edge of the room, gripping the baseball bat like a weapon. "There he is," the man shouted, pointing at Marcus. Without waiting for them to react further, Marcus lunged forward. His movements were fluid and precise, honed by decades of combat experience. The first attacker swung the crowbar wildly, but Marcus ducked, beneath it, closing the distance between them in an instant. With a single powerful blow, he brought the bat down on the man's arm, causing him to drop the weapon with a cry of pain. The second intruder charged at him, fists raised. Marcus sidestepped effortlessly, using the man's momentum against him. Grabbing the attacker's wrist, he twisted it sharply, forcing him to his knees. A quick strike to the back of the knee sent him sprawling to the floor, clutching his leg, in agony. By now, the third man had recovered from his shock and was rushing toward Marcus with the spray paint can raised like a club. Marcus spun around just in time to block the blow with the bat, then countered with a swift kick to the man's stomach. The force of the impact sent him stumbling backward into the coffee table, which collapsed under his weight. Within seconds, all three intruders were on the ground, groaning in pain. Marcus stood over them, breathing heavily but otherwise unharmed. His instincts had served him well once again, but the fight wasn't over. From outside, the sound of car engines revving grew louder. Headlights swept across the front windows as vehicles screeched to a halt in the driveway. Shadows moved behind the curtains and voices shouted orders. Reinforcements had arrived. Marcus cursed under his breath. These weren't ordinary burglars or random vandals. They were organized. And judging by the sheer number of people gathering outside, they meant business. Quickly, Marcus grabbed his phone from the kitchen counter and dialed 911. "I need police. At my address immediately," he said urgently. "There are intruders in my house and more are outside." The dispatcher assured him help was on the way, but Marcus knew it would take time. Until then, he was on his own. He glanced at the fallen men sprawled across his living room floor. Two of them were unconscious while the third clutched his side, whimpering in pain. Marcus considered tying them up, but he didn't have enough rope or zip ties. Instead, he dragged them into the hallway and barricaded the door leading upstairs, ensuring his family stayed safe. Back in the living room, Marcus positioned himself near the front entrance, ready to defend his home. He tightened his grip on the baseball bat, his muscles tense but controlled. He scanned the room, taking stock of potential weapons, the crowbar, a broken chair leg, even pieces of shattered glass. Anything could be useful in a fight. Outside, the gang members shouted taunts, pounding on the doors and windows. Some threw rocks, shattering what remained of the glass panes. Others tried to break in, prying at the locks with tools. The racket was deafening, filling the night with chaos and fear. Despite the overwhelming odds, Marcus refused to panic. He reminded himself of who he was, a Navy SEAL, trained to handle situations far worse than this. These cowards might outnumber him, but they lacked discipline, skill, and resolve. As the pounding continued, Marcus formulated a plan. If he could hold them off long enough for the police to arrive, he might stand a chance. But if things escalated further, he'd have to rely on his instincts, and perhaps a bit of luck, to survive. For now, though, he waited. Standing tall, in the dimly lit room surrounded by destruction and hatred, Marcus prepared to face whatever came next. Because one thing was certain. Whoever these people were, they had no idea who they were dealing with. And soon, they would learn exactly why. Marcus Johnson was called the Ghost. The police arrived within 15 minutes, their flashing blue and red lights cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. Officers poured out of their cars, weapons drawn, shouting orders for everyone to stay back. By then, the gang members outside had scattered into the night, disappearing as quickly as they'd appeared. Only the damage they left behind remained, a wrecked house, shattered windows, and walls covered in hateful graffiti. Marcus stepped onto the porch to meet the officers, his expression grim but composed. He explained what had happened calmly, leaving out unnecessary details about how he'd single-handedly taken down 3 intruders. The officers nodded sympathetically, jotting notes in their notebooks. They promised to investigate thoroughly, assuring Marcus that hate crimes were taken seriously. But deep down, Marcus knew better. He could see it in their eyes, the reluctance, the unspoken acknowledgement that justice might not come easily. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky with soft hues of orange and pink, Marcus stood amidst the wreckage of his once peaceful home. Sarah emerged from upstairs, her face pale with shock. She hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "What are we going to do?" she whispered. "We'll fix this," Marcus replied firmly, though his mind was already racing ahead. Fixing the house was only part of the solution. If they wanted true safety, if they wanted to protect their family, they needed answers. Who were these people? Why had they targeted them specifically? And most importantly, how far were they willing to go? That morning, after ensuring his family was safe at a neighbor's house, Marcus began his own investigation. Years of training, as a Navy SEAL, had taught him how to gather intelligence quietly and efficiently. He started by examining the graffiti on his walls. The symbols weren't random. They matched those used by white supremacist groups across the country. Someone local must have been inspired or funded by these organizations. Next, Marcus reviewed security camera footage from neighboring homes. Many of his neighbors had installed cameras after a string of recent burglaries in the area. With their permission, Marcus combed through hours of recordings, searching for anything suspicious. It didn't take long to find something. On multiple nights leading up to the attack, the same group of young men had been spotted driving slowly past his house. Their faces were partially hidden, but their vehicles were distinctive: an old black pickup truck with rusted fenders and a newer SUV with tinted windows. Using license plate numbers captured on camera, Marcus traced the vehicles to their owners. One belonged to a man named Derek Hargrove, a burly tattooed mechanic with ties to several extremist groups. Online searches revealed that Derek frequented local bars known for harboring racist ideologies. Another vehicle was registered to a teenager whose social media profiles were filled with violent rhetoric and neo-Nazi propaganda. But Marcus didn't stop there. He dug deeper, uncovering connections between Derek and other individuals involved in similar attacks throughout the region. There was a pattern, a network of hate spreading its roots deeper than anyone realized. These weren't isolated incidents. They were coordinated efforts designed to intimidate minorities and drive them out of predominantly white neighborhoods. One name kept popping up repeatedly during his research: Charles Whitaker. A wealthy businessman with alleged ties to white supremacist organizations, Whitaker had reportedly financed several hate campaigns under the guise of community preservation. Though no direct evidence linked him to criminal activity, whispers of his involvement circulated online forums frequented by extremists. Marcus realized this wasn't just about him anymore. This was bigger than his family, bigger than his neighborhood. It was a systemic issue fueled by fear, ignorance, and hatred. And if nothing was done, more families would suffer the same fate, or worse. Determined to expose the truth, Marcus decided to infiltrate the group responsible for the attack. He couldn't rely solely on law enforcement. They were stretched thin, and resources were limited. Besides, Marcus knew firsthand how bureaucratic red tape often delayed action. If he wanted results, he'd have to get his hands dirty. Over the next few days, Marcus transformed himself. Gone was the handyman who fixed leaky faucets and coached Little League games. In his place stood a man hardened by years of combat, ready to face whatever came his way. He shaved off his beard, donned darker clothes, and adopted a demeanor that radiated quiet menace. His first move was simple, yet effective. He visited one of the bars where Derek and his crew spent their evenings. Sitting alone in a corner booth, Marcus ordered a beer and observed silently. Conversations flowed freely around him, fueled by alcohol and misplaced bravado. Racists' jokes echoed through the room, accompanied by laughter and cheers. At first, no one paid much attention to Marcus. He blended in seamlessly, appearing neither threatening nor overly friendly. But when someone mentioned the attack on his house, bragging about how they showed that black guy his place, Marcus spoke up. "You talking about the Johnson place?" he asked casually, keeping his tone neutral. The speaker, a wiry man with a Confederate flag tattoo on his forearm, glanced at him suspiciously. "Yeah, what's it to you?" "Just curious," Marcus replied, shrugging. "Heard they trashed the place pretty bad. Guess some people can't handle living among us, huh?" The comment earned a round of approving nods from nearby patrons. Slowly but surely, Marcus gained their trust. Over the course of several visits, he pieced together fragments of information, names, meeting locations, plans for future attacks. Each detail brought him closer to dismantling the operation. However, Marcus knew he couldn't act rashly. Patience was key. He needed concrete evidence, something undeniable that would hold up in court. So, he continued playing the role of an ally, all while documenting everything he learned. One evening, as Marcus sipped his drink and listened intently, Derek entered the bar with two companions. His massive frame commanded attention, and the crowd parted to let him pass. When Derek spotted Marcus sitting alone, he approached cautiously. "Haven't seen you around here before," Derek said, narrowing his eyes. "New in town," Marcus lied smoothly. "Just passing through. Heard this was the spot to meet real patriots." Derek studied him for a moment, then grinned. "Well, welcome aboard. We've got big plans coming up. You interested in helping out?" Marcus nodded slowly, careful not to appear too eager. "Depends. What kind of work are we talking about?" Derek leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Let's just say we're making sure certain undesirable elements know their place. Keep your ears open and you'll hear more soon." With that cryptic promise, Derek walked away, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. He felt a surge of anger but forced himself to remain calm. Every interaction, every word exchanged, brought him closer to taking these men down. By the time Marcus returned home late that night, he had enough information to start building a case. Names, dates, locations, all meticulously recorded in his phone. Tomorrow he would share his findings with Detective Alvarez, the officer assigned to his case. Together, they could begin unraveling the web of hatred threatening their community. As Marcus lay in bed beside Sarah, staring at the ceiling, he reflected on the journey ahead. This fight wouldn't be easy. It would require courage, sacrifice, and unwavering determination. But Marcus had faced tougher battles before, and won. For now, he allowed himself a moment of rest, knowing that dawn would bring new challenges. The road to justice was long, but Marcus was prepared to walk it, one step at a time. The next morning, Marcus woke up before sunrise, his mind already racing with plans. He couldn't afford to waste a single moment. Every second counted in this high-stakes game of cat and mouse. Sitting at the kitchen table with a steaming cup of coffee, he reviewed the notes he'd compiled over the past few days. Names, locations, patterns, all were meticulously written down in shorthand only he could decipher. It was overwhelming, but Marcus thrived under pressure. Detective Alvarez arrived an hour later, looking tired but determined. Marcus greeted him on the porch, offering a firm handshake. "I've got something for you," Marcus said without preamble. Inside, Marcus spread out maps, photos, and documents on the dining table. He explained everything he'd uncovered. The graffiti symbols linked to extremist groups, the license plates traced back to Derek and others, the bar conversations hinting at future attacks. Detective Alvarez listened intently, occasionally jotting notes or asking clarifying questions. "This is more than just vandalism," Marcus concluded. "These guys are part of a larger network. They're organized, funded, and dangerous." Alvarez nodded gravely. "You're right. This goes beyond your neighborhood. We've seen similar cases pop up in other towns too, but we need hard evidence if we want to shut them down for good." Marcus agreed. Evidence was key. Without it, these men would slip through the cracks, free to continue their reign of terror. That's when Marcus made a bold decision. "I'm Going to get closer to them, he told Alvarez. Infiltrate deeper. Find out what they're planning next. Alvarez frowned. Are you sure about this? These people aren't amateurs. If they find out who you really are, they won't. Marcus interrupted firmly. I've done this kind of thing before. Trust me, I know how to stay invisible. Reluctantly, Alvarez gave his approval, emphasizing the importance of caution. Keep me updated, he said, and don't take unnecessary risks. Your family needs you alive. With that, Marcus began his mission. Over the following days, he immersed himself deeper into the gang's world. He frequented the same bars, attended secret meetings in abandoned warehouses, and listened carefully to every conversation. At first, the group treated him with suspicion, testing his loyalty with small tasks like distributing flyers or tagging buildings with racist symbols. Marcus complied without hesitation, all while gathering intel. One night, during a meeting, in a dimly lit garage, Derek addressed the group. Standing in front of a makeshift map pinned to the wall, he outlined their next target, a local mosque. His voice dripped with venom as he described plans to vandalize the building and intimidate its worshippers. We'll send a message loud and clear, Derek declared, slamming his fist on the table. This town belongs to us. The room erupted, in cheers. But Marcus remained silent, his stomach churning with anger. He knew he had to stop them, not just for his sake, but for the countless innocent lives they intended to harm. After the meeting ended, Marcus slipped away unnoticed. Once safely back home, he called Detective Alvarez immediately. They're planning an attack on the mosque, he said urgently. It's happening tomorrow night. Alvarez promised to mobilize officers discreetly, ensuring they wouldn't tip off the gang. Meanwhile, Marcus devised a plan to sabotage the operation from within. The next evening, Marcus joined the gang as they gathered near the mosque, hiding tools and weapons in the trunk of Derek's truck. As they prepared to strike, Marcus subtly tampered with their equipment. He loosened bolts, spilled paint thinner, and disabled flashlights. Anything to slow them down. When the group finally approached the mosque, chaos ensued almost instantly. Tools malfunctioned, arguments broke out, and confusion reigned. Before long, police sirens wailed in the distance, signaling the arrival of law enforcement. Panicked, the gang scattered, abandoning their plans. Derek glared at Marcus, suspicion flickering in his eyes. Did you have something to do with this? He growled. Marcus feigned innocence. How could I? I'm just as messed up as you are. For now, Derek seemed convinced, but Marcus knew he was walking a thin line. One misstep, and his cover would be blown. Over the next several weeks, Marcus continued playing the role of an ally while secretly dismantling the gang's operations. He fed false information to throw them off track, tipped off authorities about their movements, and even staged accidents to delay their plans. Each success brought him closer to exposing the entire network. But the deeper Marcus went, the more dangerous things became. The gang grew increasingly paranoid, accusing members of betrayal and tightening their ranks. One night, after a particularly tense meeting, Derek pulled Marcus aside. "You've been useful so far," Derek said, his tone heavy with warning. "But if I ever find out you're working against us, you won't live to see another day, understand?" Marcus met his gaze steadily. Loud and clear. Despite the mounting risks, Marcus refused to back down. He thought about his family, his community, and all the people counting on him to make things right. Fear wasn't an option. One breakthrough came unexpectedly. While tailing one of the gang members, a young man named Kyle, Marcus discovered a hidden stash of documents in the trunk of his car. Among them were detailed plans for upcoming attacks, financial records linking Charles Whitaker to the group, and encrypted messages outlining strategies for recruiting new members. Knowing he couldn't retrieve the documents directly without raising suspicion, Marcus snapped photos instead. Later that night, he shared the evidence with Detective Alvarez, who immediately launched an investigation into Whitaker's activities. "This is huge," Alvarez said, flipping through the photos. "If we can connect Whitaker to these crimes, we might be able to dismantle the entire operation." Marcus allowed himself a rare smile. Progress was being made, but the fight was far from over. As he lay in bed that night, exhaustion weighing heavily on his shoulders, Marcus reflected on the journey ahead. He'd faced death countless times before, yet nothing compared to the weight of protecting those he loved. Still, he found solace in knowing that every step he took brought him closer to justice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But Marcus was ready. For now he closed his eyes, letting sleep claim him momentarily, knowing that dawn would bring another battle and another chance to fight for what was right. The days that followed were a blur of tension and calculated moves. Marcus knew he was walking a dangerous tightrope, balancing his double life as both a husband and father and an undercover infiltrator. Every decision he made carried consequences, not just for himself, but for everyone around him. The gang's paranoia had reached new heights, and trust among its members was eroding rapidly. Accusations flew like daggers in their secret meetings, with Derek at the center of it all, barking orders and demanding loyalty. For Marcus, this growing chaos presented both opportunities and risks. On one hand, the gang's disarray made them vulnerable to mistakes, which he could exploit to gather more evidence or sabotage their plans. On the other hand, the heightened suspicion meant even the slightest misstep could expose him. One wrong word, one awkward glance, it was enough to seal his fate. Despite the constant pressure, Marcus remained focused. He reminded himself of why he was doing this. Not just for revenge, but to protect his family and countless others who might become targets if these men weren't stopped. This wasn't about ego. It was about justice. One evening, while attending another clandestine meeting in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, Marcus overheard a conversation that sent chills down his spine. Derek and two of his top lieutenants huddled near, a flickering lantern, their voices low but intense. "We need to send a stronger message," Derek said, pacing back and forth. "Something that'll make people think twice about crossing us." "Like what?" one of the lieutenants asked hesitantly. Derek smirked, a cruel glint in his eye. "Burn his house down. Make sure they know we're serious." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. They were talking about his home, his family. He clenched his fists tightly, forcing himself to stay calm. If they discovered he was listening, it would be over. "I don't know, man," the second lieutenant muttered. "That's risky. What if someone gets hurt? Or worse, what if the cops catch wind of it?" "It's not about being careful anymore," Derek snapped. "It's about showing power. Fear is our greatest weapon." Marcus's mind raced. He couldn't let this happen. But how could he stop them without blowing his cover? Later that night, after leaving the meeting early under the pretense of running errands, Marcus called Detective Alvarez. "They're planning to torch my house," he said urgently. "We need to act fast." Alvarez didn't hesitate. "I'll get officers stationed nearby, but you can't go home tonight, not until we neutralize the threat." Marcus agreed reluctantly. Though he hated the idea of leaving Sarah and the kids alone, he knew it was the only way to keep them safe. He arranged for them to stay with a trusted neighbor, ensuring they wouldn't return home until the danger passed. Meanwhile, Marcus devised a plan to turn the tables on the gang. Instead of waiting for them to strike, he decided to lure them into a trap. Using information he'd gathered during previous meetings, he identified a secluded forest cabin where the group often gathered to plot their attacks. It was remote, isolated, and perfect for an ambush. With Detective Alvarez's help, Marcus set up surveillance cameras and planted tracking devices on the gang's vehicles. They coordinated closely, ensuring law enforcement would be ready to swoop in at the right moment. The next day, Marcus attended yet another meeting, this time pretending to have defected from Derek's crew. He claimed he'd grown tired of their endless failures and wanted to join forces with a rival group, rumored to operate in the area. To prove his sincerity, he offered to lead them straight to Derek's hideout. "They're weak," Marcus told the rival gang leader, a wiry man named Carter. "Take them out and you'll control everything." Carter eyed him suspiciously but ultimately agreed. "If you're lying to me." "I'm not," Marcus replied confidently. Armed with false promises and carefully crafted lies, Marcus played both sides against each other. By feeding conflicting information to Derek and Carter, he ensured neither side suspected betrayal. Meanwhile, police monitored every move, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Finally, the night of the confrontation arrived. Under the cover of darkness, Marcus led Carter's group to the forest cabin, where Derek and his inner circle were holed up. Unbeknownst to either gang, law enforcement surrounded the area, hidden among the trees and armed with warrants for arrest. As Carter's men approached the cabin, shouting insults and threats, Derek emerged with his crew, weapons drawn. Chaos erupted almost immediately. Shouts turned to gunfire as both groups exchanged blows, each accusing the other of treachery. Amid the confusion, Marcus slipped away, retreating to a safe distance where Detective Alvarez awaited. Together, they watched as officers stormed the scene, ordering everyone to drop their weapons. Resistance was futile. Outnumbered and outgunned, the gang members surrendered one by one, their faces twisted with rage and disbelief. Derek fought back ferociously, refusing to give up. But Marcus stepped forward, confronting him directly. "It's over," he said calmly, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Derek froze, recognition dawning in his eyes. "You!" he snarled, lunging toward Marcus. Before he could reach him, officers tackled Derek to the ground, cuffing his hands behind his back. As he struggled and cursed, Marcus stood tall, unflinching. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. Back at the station, detectives worked tirelessly to piece together the full extent of the gang's operations. Evidence collected from the raid, including financial records, encrypted messages, and testimony from arrested members, pointed directly to Charles Whitaker. With mounting proof of his involvement, authorities launched a formal investigation into the businessman's activities, freezing his assets and issuing subpoenas for further documentation. For Marcus, the victory was bittersweet. While the immediate threat had been neutralized, scars remained. His home was still damaged, his family shaken by the ordeal. But they were alive, and that was what mattered most. That night, Marcus returned to his house, now guarded by patrol cars stationed outside. Sarah threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. "Thank God you're okay," she whispered. "I promised I'd keep you safe," Marcus replied softly. "And I always keep my promises." Together, they sat on the porch watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of gold and pink. Peace had returned for now, but Marcus stayed vigilant, knowing that evil often lurked in the shadows, waiting for its next chance to strike. And if it ever did, Marcus would be ready. The days following the raid were a whirlwind of activity. News of the takedown spread quickly, dominating headlines and sparking conversations across the community. Local reporters swarmed the neighborhood, eager to uncover every detail of the operation that had dismantled one of the most dangerous hate groups in recent memory. Marcus's name remained out of the spotlight. Detective Alvarez ensured his role as an informant stayed confidential, but whispers circulated among neighbors who suspected he'd played a part in bringing the criminals to justice. For Marcus, life slowly began returning to normal, or at least as close to normal as it could get after such turmoil. The shattered windows of his home were replaced, graffiti-covered walls repainted, and broken furniture repaired or thrown away. Yet no amount of physical restoration could erase the emotional toll the ordeal had taken on him and his family. Emily and Jake seemed quieter than usual, clinging to their parents more tightly. Sarah tried her best to reassure them, but Marcus knew it would take time for everyone to heal fully. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, Marcus sat on the porch with Sarah. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers. It felt like a moment stolen from the chaos, a rare opportunity to breathe without worry. "Do you think we'll ever feel safe again?" Sarah asked softly, breaking the silence. Marcus sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I do know this. We survived, and sometimes surviving is enough." Sarah nodded, though doubt lingered in her eyes. What happens if they come back? What if there are others like them? We'll face them when the time comes, Marcus said firmly. But for now, let's focus on rebuilding. Not just our house, but our lives. We've earned that much. His words carried weight, not just for Sarah, but for himself too. Over the years, Marcus had learned that fear was a natural response to danger, but letting it consume you only gave your enemies power. He refused to live in fear any longer. If anything, the attack had reminded him of why he'd chosen this quiet suburban life, to protect his family and give them a future free from violence. He wouldn't let anyone take that away. Meanwhile, the legal battle against Derek and his gang raged on. Arrests led to investigations which uncovered even deeper layers of corruption and conspiracy. Authorities traced funds from Charles Whitaker's accounts to various extremist organizations nationwide. Evidence mounted, painting a damning picture of a man who had used his wealth and influence to fuel hatred and division. When charges were finally filed, Whitaker found himself facing multiple counts of racketeering, inciting violence, and funding terrorist activities. Derek, too, faced severe consequences, with overwhelming evidence linking him to numerous hate crimes including vandalism, arson attempts, and assault. He was sentenced to decades behind bars. During his trial, witnesses testified about his leadership role in the gang, describing how he manipulated young men into committing acts of violence under the guise of patriotism. His once fearsome reputation crumbled into disgrace as the truth came to light. As justice unfolded in courtrooms, Marcus quietly continued his own form of healing. He reconnected with old friends, joined community meetings aimed at promoting unity, and volunteered at local schools to mentor children. His actions inspired others to speak out against racism and intolerance. Slowly but surely, the neighborhood transformed, not overnight, but incrementally, as people rallied together to support one another. One Saturday morning, Marcus attended a town hall meeting organized by Detective Alvarez. Residents gathered in the community center, sharing stories, offering solutions, and pledging to stand united against hate. Marcus watched silently from the back of the room, proud of the progress being made. When Alvarez called him to the front to say a few words, Marcus hesitated before stepping up to the podium. "I'm not here to talk about myself," he began, his voice steady. "This isn't about me, it's about all of us. Hate thrives when good people stay silent. But when we stand together, when we refuse to let fear dictate our lives, we can overcome anything." Applause erupted, filling the room with warmth and hope. For the first time in months, Marcus felt a sense of peace, not because the world was perfect, but because he knew they were moving in the right direction. Months later, Marcus stood in his backyard, watching Emily and Jake chase each other around the swing set. Laughter echoed through the air, a sound he hadn't realized he'd missed so much. Sarah walked over, handing him a glass of lemonade. "You did good," she said simply, smiling. Marcus shrugged modestly. "We all did. This wasn't something I could have done alone," and it was true. While Marcus had played a pivotal role in exposing the gang, the victory belonged to the entire community. Together, they had confronted evil head-on and emerged stronger for it. Still, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on the journey, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the moments of doubt and fear. Through it all, he had relied on the lessons drilled into him during his time as a Navy SEAL: adaptability, resilience, and unwavering determination. These qualities had guided him through war zones and covert missions, and now, through the battle for his home and family. As the sun set, painting the sky in vibrant shades of orange and purple, Marcus allowed himself a moment of gratitude. Life wasn't perfect, and challenges undoubtedly lay ahead. But for now, he cherished the peace, knowing he had fought for it, and won. In the distance, a neighbor waved, calling out a friendly greeting. Marcus waved back, feeling a renewed sense of belonging. The scars of the past might never fully fade, but neither would the strength gained from overcoming them. Whatever came next, Marcus Johnson would be ready. After all, he wasn't just a husband, father, or handyman. He was a protector, a warrior, and a beacon of hope in a world that desperately needed it.